My name is Emily Wilson, I'm 32, and at our annual shareholder meeting, my own mother announced she was giving the company I'd spent my life building to my sister. Before I tell you how I got every single thing I was owed and then some, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I'd love to see how far my story has traveled. It all happened in a boardroom that always smelled faintly of lemon polish and quiet ambition. It was the annual Wilson & Company construction shareholder meeting, and the air was thick with the kind of polite, manufactured tension that only exists in corporate America. For me, it was supposed to be a coronation. For 10 years, since the day I graduated college, I had been the engine of that company. The COO. The one who lived and breathed blueprints and balance sheets. While my older sister, Rebecca, was finding herself in Bali or learning pottery in Tuscany, I was here, in Denver, turning our family's respectable local business into a regional powerhouse. I had just finished my presentation. Projections were up 20% year over year. Margins were the healthiest they'd been in a decade. We were landing bigger, more complex contracts than my grandfather ever dreamed of. I sat down, my heart thumping with a steady, confident beat. This was it. This was the moment my mother, Patricia Wilson, the company's chairman, would finally acknowledge the sweat and sacrifice. This was the moment she would announce my promotion to CEO. She stood up, smoothing the front of her expensive silk blouse, smiling that polished, camera-ready smile of hers. Thank you, Emily, for that thorough report. The way she said thorough hung in the air, sounding less like a compliment and more like an accusation of being uninspired, of being boring. I felt a small, cold knot tighten in my stomach. As we looked to the future, she continued, her eyes sweeping the room but never quite landing on me, we need more than just solid foundations. We need a new vision. A fresh, dynamic face to lead us into the next decade. We need a storyteller, a brand ambassador. The cold knot in my stomach turned to ice. This wasn't the speech I was expecting. Therefore, it is my immense pleasure to announce that the board has unanimously approved a new leadership structure. Our new chief executive officer will be my daughter, Rebecca Wilson. The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. The room erupted in a wave of polite, utterly confused applause. Rebecca, who had been back for all of 6 months and held the vague, cushy title of creative brand director, stood up and gave a little, pageant-like wave. Rebecca, who had once asked me if drywall came in different colors. Rebecca, whose biggest contribution had been redesigning the company logo to look more Instagrammable. I just sat there, my spine ramrod straight, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap my knuckles were white. My mind was a blizzard of white noise. I saw my father, a minority shareholder and a man I once worshipped, staring intently at his polished shoes. I saw Frank, my head of operations, his weathered face a mask of disbelief and disgust. But mostly, I saw my mother and my sister, standing together under the recessed lighting, a perfect portrait of public betrayal. The meeting ended. The room emptied out in a murmur of hushed conversations. People avoided my eyes. They offered me limp, sweaty handshakes and muttered things that sounded like condolences, as if someone had died. And in a way, someone had. The Emily who believed that hard work, fairness, and merit would always win the day, she died in that boardroom. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't scream. I walked back to my office, the one I'd practically lived in for a decade, and closed the door. The silence was deafening. I walked over to the old oak filing cabinet in the corner, a relic from my grandfather's time, and opened a drawer that had been locked for years. My fingers brushed past old project files until they found it, a small, cedar box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a letter written in my grandfather's familiar, strong cursive. He was the one who started Wilson & Company from a pickup truck and a dream. He was the one who taught me how to read a blueprint before I could read a novel. I unfolded the letter, my hands shaking almost uncontrollably. It was the one he gave me the day I graduated from college with my civil engineering degree. I read the last line, the words he had made me promise I would never forget. Build something for yourself before you build for anyone else, Emily. I folded the letter, the paper soft and worn, and placed it back in its velvet nest. My shock was crystallizing, hardening into something else. Something cold and clear and sharp as surgical steel. They had made their choice. They had placed their bet. Now, it was my turn to play my hand. My grandfather, Edward Wilson, was a legend. He had concrete dust in his veins and a sense of integrity as solid as the foundations he poured. When I was 8, he'd take me to job sites. While other kids were at the playground, I was learning the difference between rebar and wire mesh, the smell of fresh sawdust my favorite perfume. He taught me that a building was only as strong as its core, and a business was only as good as its word. I remember one sweltering summer afternoon, a subcontractor tried to pass off a cheaper, subpar grade of lumber. My grandfather didn't just fire him. He made the man tear down the entire frame with his own crew, board by board, while he stood there, arms crossed, making sure it was done right. "Your name is on the sign, Emily," he told me later, his voice low and serious. "That's not just a word. It's a promise. Don't you ever let anyone, not even your own blood, make you break it." He was my hero. When he passed away, it felt like the whole world had tilted off its axis. He left the company to my mother, believing she would do right by it, and by me. He was the one who, after I got my degree, sat me down with that cedar box. "Listen to me," he'd said. "Your mother is ambitious. And Rebecca is her mother's daughter. I want you to have your own thing. Something nobody can touch." He had helped me set up a small, independent consulting firm on the side. EW Consulting, Edward Wilson Consulting. "Just a little something for your passion projects," he'd said with a wink. A smart builder never puts all her tools in one box. I had poured my life into Wilson and Company, believing my work would speak for itself. I was the one who stayed when a prestigious architecture firm in New York tried to recruit me right out of college. I still remember the phone call with their recruiter, Mark, the sound of sirens faint in the background of his Times Square office. "Emily, this is a 6-figure offer, with a corner office view of Central Park." "What's in Denver?" "My family's company is in Denver," I'd replied, my voice firm, though my heart ached for the lost opportunity. "They need me." And they did. I modernized their ancient accounting systems, implemented project tracking software that cut delays by 40%, and nearly doubled our revenue in 4 years by aggressively and successfully bidding on complex infrastructure projects my mother was too timid to chase. I sacrificed relationships, friendships, my 20s. All of it. I did it for the legacy. For the dream my grandfather built. I even put my foot down when my mother, in a misguided cost-cutting move, wanted to eliminate the company's generous pension plan for its longest-serving employees. I went to bat for Frank and his team, the guys who had been loyal to my grandfather for decades. I threatened to resign then and there, and my mother, faced with losing her only competent operational manager, had backed down. That's when Frank's respect for me was cemented. "You're your grandfather's girl, through and through," he'd said, his voice thick with gratitude. Then Rebecca came home. She floated back into our lives on a cloud of designer perfume and vapid stories of her travels. My mother was ecstatic. "Rebecca has such a wonderful eye for branding," she'd gush. Rebecca was appointed creative brand director, and her first order of business was to declare our old, sturdy logo dated. I remember a particularly cringeworthy interaction in the break room. Rebecca was holding up 2 color swatches. "Do we feel like our brand is more of a serene sage or an aspirational teal?" she'd asked me, dead serious. I had just come from a 4-hour meeting hashing out the seismic retrofitting requirements for a hospital wing. I just stared at her. "I think it's the color of reinforced concrete, Rebecca," I said, and walked away. But my mother saw genius. I started to feel a growing unease. I had even mentioned one of my passion projects to my father over dinner one night, a comprehensive plan for a sustainable, mixed-use development I called Everpine. I'd been developing it under EW Consulting for a national green architecture competition. He barely looked up from his steak. That's nice, honey. A little hobby to keep you busy. A hobby. That's what they saw my passion as. That's what they saw me as. The reliable, sturdy, boring foundation. They had no idea that the foundation was about to develop a crack so big it would bring the whole house down. The weeks after Rebecca was named CEO were a special kind of hell. She'd call meetings to discuss the vibe of our marketing materials and then cancel project check-ins because she had a lunch date. The office morale plummeted. Key project managers started quietly updating their resumes. I tried to keep things running, but I was working against a tidal wave of incompetence. The final straw wasn't a single event, but a slow, creeping realization, like watching a hairline crack spread across a windshield. It started with little things. My mother's assistant, a woman who normally left at 5 on the dot, was suddenly staying late, running documents through the industrial shredder. Then there were the hushed phone calls my mother would take in her office, the door pointedly closed. Then, the calendar invites for private estate planning with the family lawyer, invites that never came to my inbox. I wasn't a fool. I was the COO. I still had top-level admin access to our servers, something my mother and sister, in their breathtaking arrogance, had overlooked. One night, fueled by a sick feeling in my gut and 2 cups of black coffee, I stayed late. The office was a tomb. I didn't hack anything. I just used my own credentials to run a data recovery scan on the backup server, targeting deleted files and temporary documents from the executive legal folder. And there it was. A draft of a new shareholder agreement, time-stamped from 3 days prior. It was a complete restructuring of the company's ownership. 72% of all shares transferred to Rebecca Wilson. 18% retained by Patricia Wilson. 10% to my grandmother's trust. My name wasn't on the document. Not for a single share. Not for a single mention. They weren't just pushing me out of leadership. They were erasing me. Erasing my decade of work, my sacrifices. They were stealing my birthright. I printed a copy, the paper warm in my trembling hands. I walked out of my office, through the silent halls of the company I loved, and drove straight to my parents' house. They were having a celebratory dinner with Rebecca, of course. I didn't knock. I walked straight through the foyer and into the dining room. They all looked up, startled. "Emily!" "What a surprise," my mother said, her smile faltering as she saw the look on my face. I didn't say a word. I just placed the printed document on the polished mahogany table, right next to the champagne bucket. Rebecca's eyes widened. My father went pale, looking down at his plate as if it held the secrets to the universe. My mother just stared at it, her expression hardening. "You found it," she said. It wasn't a question. "I did," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "Explain it to me." "It's for the best, Emily," she said, finally looking at me, her eyes as cold as a winter morning. "This company needs a leader who can charm people, who has soft skills. You're a builder. You're brilliant at the nuts and bolts. But Rebecca is a visionary. She can sell the story." A visionary? The woman who thought project financing was bad energy? I felt a laugh, sharp and bitter, rise in my throat, but I choked it down. A visionary needs something to have a vision about, Mother. I built the very things she's taking credit for. Rebecca scoffed, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Emily. It's just business. You're taking this so personally." "Just business," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. I sacrificed my 20s for this business. I turned down a life in New York for this business. This business is my life's work. I turned to my father. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Dad?" I asked, my voice cracking for the first time. You're letting this happen? After everything Grandpa taught us? He cleared his throat, shifting in his chair. Patricia, maybe we should reconsider the percentages. Emily has been very dedicated. It's done, Robert, my mother snapped, her voice like a whip. The papers are with the lawyers. It's done. That was it. That was all the fight he had in him. I looked at the three of them, the puppet master, the puppet, and the man who let them cut the strings. Grandpa always said this company was built on two things, I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me. Steel and integrity. I see one of those is already gone. I won't stick around to see the other one rust away. I turned and walked out. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I just walked. I could feel their eyes on my back, but I didn't look back. As I closed the door behind me, I heard my mother say, with chilling confidence, she'll be back. She has nowhere else to go. Oh, how wrong she was. The first 48 hours were a lost weekend. I unplugged my phone. I drew the blinds. I sat in the oppressive silence of my apartment and let the full weight of the betrayal wash over me. It was a physical pain, a hollow ache in my chest. Every choice I had ever made, every sacrifice, every late night, every missed wedding and birthday party, it all paraded through my mind, mocking me. I had built my entire identity around being the successor, the one who would carry my grandfather's torch. And in one afternoon, they had told me that identity was worthless. I let myself grieve. I cried for my grandfather. I cried for the years I had lost. I cried for the family I thought I had. I was adrift. Then, on the third day, I woke up, and the grief had been replaced by a quiet, burning anger. It was a clean flame, cauterizing the wound. I walked over to the cedar box, my grandfather's box. I opened it and read his letter one more time. Build something for yourself. He hadn't said inherit. He hadn't said be given. He had said build. I wasn't just his granddaughter. I was his student. His legacy. And I would not let them tarnish it. I plugged my phone back in. It exploded with notifications. Dozens of texts and missed calls. I ignored all of them except one. I called Mr. Davies, the lawyer who had helped me set up EW Consulting years ago. He was a shrewd, old-school attorney my grandfather had trusted implicitly. Davies, his voice crackled over the line. It's Emily Wilson, I said. We have a situation. I walked him through everything, my voice steady and factual. I told him about the new shareholder agreement. I told him about Rebecca being named CEO. I told him about the Everpine project. He listened without interruption, a series of quiet grunts his only response. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I feared he would tell me it was a lost cause. They've made a critical error, Emily, he finally said, his voice low and conspiratorial. A monumentally stupid one. They got greedy, and they got sloppy. They've underestimated you. Now, tell me everything about Everpine. Every email, every draft, every timestamp. We talked for 2 hours. We built a strategy. A fortress. The final push came that evening. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Frank. They're gutting the place, Emily. Rebecca held a meeting today. She's bringing in a whole new team of creatives. She put me on notice. Said my experience was old-fashioned. She's going after my team next. The guys who have been here for 30 years. The guys who worked with your grandpa. A cold fury washed over me. They weren't just erasing me. They were erasing him. And that's not the worst of it, his next text read. She's officially presenting the Everpine project to Harrison Development next week. She's passing it off as her own idea. She called it a new, visionary direction for the company. I closed my eyes. The hobby my father had dismissed. The project I had poured my heart and soul into. The one I had meticulously registered under EW Consulting for the architecture competition. I typed back a reply. Frank. I need you to do exactly as she says. Don't fight it. If she tells your team to pack their things, tell them to pack their personal things. There are going to be some changes. There was a pause. Then a single reply popped up. I understand, boss. It's good to have you back. I hung up the phone. The time for grieving was over. The time for building had begun. The day of the big meeting, I didn't wear a suit of armor. I wore a simple, impeccably tailored navy blue dress. Power isn't about shouting. It's about precision. I arrived at the Wilson & Company headquarters and didn't go to the boardroom. I went to the small waiting area outside, where Mr. Davies was already waiting for me, a slim leather briefcase resting on his knees. We sat in silence. We were 5 minutes early. Punctuality is also about precision. Through the glass walls, I could see the scene unfolding. Rebecca stood at the head of the table, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation, my presentation. I could see the beautiful 3D renderings of the Everpine project, the detailed schematics, the financial projections I had spent months perfecting. Mr. Harrison, the CEO of Harrison Development, a notoriously sharp and no-nonsense developer, looked profoundly bored. His team looked confused. Rebecca was fumbling, and it was painful to watch. She was using my words, but they were hollow in her mouth. She couldn't answer the technical questions. Can you elaborate on the tensile strength specifications for the primary support beams? One of Harrison's engineers asked, a pen poised over his notepad. Rebecca just smiled blankly. We have the best people on that. We believe in a very holistic approach to materials. Another engineer chimed in. The proposal mentions a geothermal heating system. Can you provide the projected ROI based on current energy market fluctuations? Right, Rebecca said, frantically clicking through my slides. The ROI is very positive. It's a win-win. I could see Harrison physically cringe. It was time. But before we could move, Harrison's own lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, leaned forward and placed a hand on her client's arm. Excuse me, Mr. Harrison, she said, her voice cutting through Rebecca's rambling. Before we proceed, I have a point of legal clarification. We received a legal notice this morning regarding the intellectual property of Project Everpine. The room went silent. Rebecca stared, mouth agape. My mother, sitting beside her, looked utterly bewildered. A notice? Patricia asked, her voice shrill. What are you talking about? This is our project. From whom? On cue, Mr. Davies opened the boardroom door, and I walked in behind him. The shock on my mother's and sister's faces was satisfying, but I didn't look at them. I looked directly at Mr. Harrison. From me, I said. My mother found her voice first, a sputtering rage. Emily! You have no right to be here. This is a private meeting. Security! That won't be necessary, Patricia, Mr. Harrison said, his voice like gravel. He was looking at me now, his eyes sharp and analytical. For the first time all morning, he looked interested. Mr. Davies calmly distributed a set of leather-bound folders to Mr. Harrison and his team. If you'll turn to tab A, he said, his voice echoing in the silent room, you will find the Certificate of Registration from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Project Everpine, including all architectural designs, engineering specifications, and associated branding, is the sole registered intellectual property of EW Consulting, a firm established in 2015. My mother's face went from red to a ghostly white. Rebecca just sank into her chair, looking like a deflated balloon. Now, I spoke. Not to my family. to Mr. Harrison. My apologies for the interruption, Mr. Harrison. It seems there's been a misunderstanding. Wilson and Company was never in a position to offer you this project. But EW Consulting is. I walked to the head of the table, picked up the remote, and went back to the first slide. What my predecessor failed to explain is that the true innovation of Everpine isn't just its design, but its economic model. The tensile strength specifications she couldn't name are a custom fabricated steel alloy that reduces construction costs by 12%. That capital, as you'll see in my revised financial model in Tab B, is reallocated to the integrated geothermal heating system, which not only makes the building carbon neutral but offers a 40-year return on investment that beats current market projections by 8%. I spoke for 10 minutes. I didn't use a script. I didn't need one. I knew every beam, every bolt, every dollar of that project. It was mine. When I finished, I laid out a revised, more profitable financial model I had developed, directly contrasting it with the outdated numbers Rebecca had been showing. When I finished, there was a long silence. My father was staring at the table, his face buried in his hands. My mother looked like she had seen a ghost. Mr. Harrison stood up. He didn't even glance at my family. He walked directly to me and extended his hand. EW Consulting, he said, his grip firm. My office will call your office this afternoon. Let's set a meeting for tomorrow morning. Checkmate. I didn't wait to see the fallout. My lawyer and I walked out of that boardroom, leaving the ruins of my family's arrogance behind us. The victory didn't feel explosive. It felt quiet, clean, and absolute. Frank called me that afternoon. The silence in here after you left, he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice, was epic. You could have heard a pin drop. Then Harrison's team packed up, and your mother and sister just sat there. For 2 weeks, there was silence from my family. But the tremors from the meeting were spreading. Frank kept me updated. Harrison Development had formally withdrawn their offer from Wilson and Company and issued a press release announcing a new partnership with EW Consulting. The news sent shockwaves through the local business community. 2 other major clients, spooked by the instability and rumors of intellectual property theft, put their projects on hold. The company my grandfather built, the company I had saved, was hemorrhaging cash and credibility. One evening, there was a knock on my apartment door. I opened it to find my mother standing there. She looked small. The tailored power suit was still there, but it seemed to hang on her, a costume for a part she no longer knew how to play. The confident, icy matriarch was gone, replaced by a tired, desperate woman. They're going to call our loans, she said, her voice raspy. The bank. We'll lose everything. The company, the house, everything your father and I built. Everything I built, I thought, but I didn't say it. I just stepped aside and let her in. She stood in the middle of my living room, looking around at a life she had never bothered to see. Your grandfather would be so disappointed, she whispered, trying one last, pathetic guilt trip. To see you tear this family apart. I finally looked at her, the anger I had suppressed for so long gone, replaced by a profound, weary sadness. No, Mother. Grandpa would be disappointed that you tried to trade his legacy of integrity for a brand refresh. You tried to destroy my future. I just decided to build my own instead. You made a business decision. So did I. Tears welled in her eyes, real tears this time. Please, Emily. You have to come back. You're the only one who can fix this. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please, save us. I walked over to my desk and picked up a thick, professionally prepared binder. I placed it on the coffee table in front of her. This isn't a plea, Mother. This is a business proposal. She opened it. Inside was a detailed rescue acquisition offer. It laid out a plan for EW Consulting to acquire a controlling 51% interest in Wilson and Company in exchange for clearing its debts and injecting new capital. I will come back, I said. But not as your daughter asking for her job. I will come back as the majority shareholder and CEO. You will retain the title of chairman, a ceremonial role with no operational authority. Dad will have a seat on the board, but that's it. And Rebecca will have a job, if she wants one. An entry-level one. She'll report to Frank. My mother stared at the papers, her face a mixture of horror and dawning realization. This was the consequence. This was the price of her betrayal. This is business now, I said, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. You have 24 hours to have your lawyers review it and accept. After that, the offer is off the table and you're on your own. She accepted. She had no other choice. My first day back as CEO was tense. I called an all-hands meeting in the main warehouse, the smell of sawdust and machine oil a welcome change from the stale air of the boardroom. I stood on a makeshift stage of stacked pallets and looked out at the faces of the employees. Some looked hopeful. Some looked resentful. Most just looked wary. I know there's been a lot of uncertainty, I began, my voice amplified by a small microphone. And I know some of you are probably wondering what the hell is going on. Let me be clear. The era of focusing on Instagram filters over infrastructure is over. The era of style over substance is over. We are going back to what my grandfather built this company on: quality, integrity, and building things that last. Your pensions are secure. Your jobs are secure, as long as you are willing to work. The free-for-all is over. The hard work starts now. I laid out a clear, 90-day plan. I promoted Frank to COO. The applause for that was genuine and loud. I had won the first battle. 6 months later, Wilson and Company felt like a different company. It felt like my grandfather's company again. We had landed 2 new municipal contracts. We had won back one of the clients who had left. We were stable. We were growing. My father came to my office one afternoon. It was the first time we had been alone since that disastrous dinner. He stood there, holding his hat in his hands, a man humbled by his own weakness. "I'm sorry, Emily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was a coward. Your mother, she has a way of convincing you that what she wants is what's right. I should have stood up for you. For what was right." I looked at the man who had taught me how to frame a wall but hadn't known how to build a backbone. "I know, Dad," I said quietly. "Thank you for saying it. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. That would take time. But it was a start. Trust takes time to rebuild." Rebecca took the entry-level job. The first few weeks, she was a ghost, silently doing the menial tasks assigned to her. One day, I found her in a meeting with a junior project manager, arguing about a materials order. "I don't understand why we can't just use the cheaper composite," she snapped. "It looks the same." I stepped in. "Rebecca, my office." Now. In my office, I didn't yell. I pulled out 2 spec sheets. The cheaper composite fails under stress tests after 5 years. The one specified lasts for 50. We don't build things that look good for 5 years. We build things that last for 50. Do you understand the difference? She just stared at the spec sheets, her arrogance finally cracking. "No," she admitted in a small voice. "Good," I said. "Then your new project is to learn." I gave her a small, standalone project, a community center for a local nonprofit. It wasn't a punishment. It was a test. Report to Frank. Learn every line item, every permit, every bolt. Prove yourself. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not ambition. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, a purpose. Last week, I stood on the dusty ground of the Everpine construction site. The first steel beams were rising into the sky, stark and beautiful against the Colorado blue. It was officially a joint project between Harrison Development and the new Wilson and Company. My company. Next to the main gate was a brand new sign. It was simple, elegant, and strong. Wilson & Co., founded by Edward Wilson. Rebuilt by Emily Wilson. I smiled. My grandfather had told me to build something for myself. I had. But I had also learned that a legacy isn't something you inherit in a will. It's something you have to be willing to fight for, to protect, and sometimes, to rebuild from the ashes of betrayal. I put on my hard hat, the familiar way to comfort, and walked onto the site, the sounds of construction a symphony of a future I had claimed as my own. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It's been a journey. And it's taught me that your value isn't determined by what others are willing to give you, but by what you are willing to build for yourself. Have you ever had to fight for something you knew you deserved, even against the people you loved? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you believe in rebuilding, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories. It means the world.